Going, then we are good to go. And so with that, I'm going to kick it over to Win, our facilitator for the day.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for welcoming me into this space. And yeah, I'm really, really glad to be here. I'm excited to spend some time talking a little bit about evaluation and reporting. Um, Going to share a couple of sort of tools or kind of like recommendations that I think make reporting and evaluation a lot easier and sort of more centered on the work that each of you and your organizations do, and less centered around the funder. So the structure for today is hoping to kind of share out some of these items with y'all for the next about 30-ish minutes, and then open it up for Q&A after that. So again, thanks so much for inviting me here, Miley and Reggie and NCAPIA. Happy to be here. So the first thing I wanted to do was really kind of ground this presentation and this conversation around sort of the quote that really kind of guides the way I approach my work, and that is, "Until the lions have their own historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." And that is essentially that this quote really for me captures that who are sort of the experts in the work and who should be telling the story and who should be centered in that story. And that is the folks who are on the ground doing the work. So everything that I do myself as a researcher, as an evaluator, as a facilitator, and so forth, really it's grounded on this foundation here. So there's three parts to today that I want to talk about. I wanted to kind of ground ourselves in a foundation of evaluation. What are some of the sort of terms that commonly show up? What are some of the words that people use for evaluation? And what is kind of like the evaluation framework and structure as a whole? So we'll kind of actually breeze through that relatively quickly, because really, I think the anchor for today's conversation is this middle piece about two useful tools that I think really facilitate an easier experience with evaluation, and also like ties evaluation to other aspects of your work, and especially the other trainings that were previously done with NQAPIA, or that NQAPIA offered with fundraising and grant writing. So, and then the last piece, I'll just share a little bit about what equitable evaluation has looked like, and how folks on the ground can really reclaim some power in evaluation. So first, let me just introduce myself. My name's Win Guan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Chinese American. I am born and raised here in New Orleans, where I'm currently based out of. Been here for a very long time, and this is very, very, very much home for me. I describe myself as a sociologist, first and foremost. That is how I have been trained. I was or am a medical sociologist by training, studying health equity work across the country. And then I describe myself as a researcher, a facilitator, and more recently thinking around an identity of sort of a philanthropic organizer, an organizer of philanthropy to be more responsible in the way they give money. So I kind of moved through a bunch of different spaces in my career, doing evaluation in grad school as a sort of like grad student for a few professors, and not really knowing exactly what it was until I decided to fully leave the academic space and pursue jobs in evaluation. I did that through working with the government in the public health space, subsequently in the nonprofit space for a nonprofit organization, and then more recently in consulting work, where a lot of my work sort of there's a dual pathway, one of which is supporting grassroots movement organizations in their evaluation and learning work, and then another pathway of really organizing funders to be better partners in supporting movement and supporting organizing. And then just to answer some of those icebreakers for the winter, I'm looking forward to just sharing a meal with chosen family. That is how I celebrate um, uh, all of the different holidays in the next couple of months, and also just like ringing in the new year. And additionally, I'm just really nerding out, reading a lot of music theory type stuff right now. I'm trying to learn piano. It's been a goal of mine for a long time. And so just started piano lessons. I'm a complete beginner. I have no idea what I'm doing and just pressing buttons right now. So that's something that I am endeavoring right now. And then on the right, I won't go through all of these, but just to give an orientation to kind of like how I approach all of my work. I approach it through what's called a liberatory research praxis. And this is essentially how I think about research and how research shows up in my life in that really kind of rethinking the way research has traditionally been done and a new pathway for doing it in a way that moves toward liberation. So, the first part of today's conversation here is just to really kind of build us or ground us in a foundation of what is evaluation when most folks kind of bring this up. Some folks will use the word evaluation. There are also other words like research. You'll hear monitoring, you'll hear learning, you'll hear surveillance, even that's a word that I feel like people are really trying to move away from, obviously, because of surveillance itself. Progress and performance indicators, like all of this stuff kind of falls into similar buckets. And I think where a lot of folks are really moving toward is probably the learning term. So you'll see a lot of funders and organizations kind of rebrand evaluation as learning because of essentially just I think of the word evaluation has carried a certain connotation at this point. So evaluation in its essence is essentially a research project. It is built around the idea of having a learning question, a research question, or an evaluation question that you are trying to answer and determining how will you go about answering that question. And so, I think in a lot of ways for relationships between organizations and funders, funders often can determine that research question and also how to go about answering that question. But I'm going to describe in a little bit how we can kind of really reclaim that power from funders through equitable evaluation. So, in addition to how we go about answering that question, there's also this aspect of what do we do with the answers itself. So on the right here is a chart that I found. I found that this one was kind of the most straightforward and easy to depict or understand and depict the phases of evaluation. That is, you come up with the questions that are interesting, that really kind of tell the story of your organization. You go about finding the ways in which you will answer that question, the data collection, the data analysis, and then what do you do with those findings? So you can build awareness through reports and one-pagers and presentations, of course. And then also more importantly, though, evaluation is really meant for learning. And so that can look like program change and program improvement, as well as advocacy for policy change and peer sharing and communal learning. But what I really wanted to spend the time today talking about is two tools that I think are really they make evaluation a lot easier if you have the opportunity to take some time and think about either one of these tools. You really don't need both. They're both pretty much similar. They both essentially are an effort to tell the story of your organization in a very concise and succinct way. I think about it as so these two tools are a theory of change and then a logic model. I think about the difference between the two is that a theory of change is more of a narrative form, and a logic model is more of a visual form. And essentially, they both describe what is it that your organization does, how does it do that, and what are the goals of your organization. And so um whenever an organization is brought up to me and I'm trying to like learn more about an organization, the easiest way for me to understand an organization's story is I'll go to their website, and some organizations will have it in their like about us tab. You like click the about us, and then you go down to either something like our model or our approach or something like that, and it'll usually give some semblance of a theory of change or sometimes even a logic model. I think more often than not, it's more of a theory of change and narrative piece. And I want to really emphasize this is very different than um, some organizations will have like an our story. And I think that our story is more about like the conception of the organization, like how did this become a thing? What's the story of like the founder? What are the values? That is all extremely important, but I'm thinking more about the sort of our model and our approach section. So to describe first, I'm going to describe a theory of change, show an example, and then we'll do the same for a logic model. For a theory of change, it's an explicit explanation of how and why it is thought that the program activities lead to its anticipated outcomes and impacts. And so it essentially answers the question of, okay, that's what y'all do, but how do you do it? And why do you think what you're doing will work in achieving your intended goals? So I'm going to show an example. I just went online, found the easiest, most sort of well-known organizations kind of theory of change. I won't name the organization because I think this is being recorded and it will be shared externally. But essentially, this organization thinks about educational inequities and its all of its approaches in an effort toward closing an equity gap in educational outcomes, and it does it through specifically a leadership or leadership and training of teachers kind of model. And so all this language and everything is pulled from models that they have published, right? And so I went on their website and found this information through what I shared earlier, like the our model tab on their website. And so you can see here they describe kind of like what is their approach and why do they think that that approach will work. And they even have this kind of visual conceptual model and sharing out basically the categories of work that their organization does. So what I always like to think about when I'm thinking about a theory of change is what is your if and then statement here, right? And so I think for this organization, the way I would kind of really word it is if we are able to recruit promising leaders and place them in these educational settings, then we can close a educational inequity gap. If we support educators in classrooms, then we will close the inequity gap, and so forth, right? Whether or not that model actually works or anything like that, that is not for me to say. And that is essentially what an evaluation is there, an evaluation question and so forth is there to report on. So the next tool that I really want to introduce here is the logic model. This is basically the theory of change in a visual diagram. And you may have seen this before, probably in perhaps evaluation requirements or something like that. But it's an organized visual diagram, a roadmap essentially that illustrates the relationship between a program's resources, its activities, activity outputs, and short-term, long-term outcomes. So I included an example of that same organization here. And a lot of these things were drawn from elements that were published in their website, reports that they have published before. And so all of that organized into what's called a logic model. And you'll see it, a logic model essentially is a left to right organization of columns that usually include these four headings here: inputs, what are the resources that this organization is putting into its work? So you can see here, some of those things are usually like funding, partnerships, and maybe like coalitions, staffing, that type of stuff. So where are the inputs that it's putting? Where are the ingredients that this organization is putting into its work? The next column you'll see is using those inputs, what are the actual things that the organization is doing? What are their activities? And so you can kind of really list them out here, right? Things like recruitment and teaching commitment and professional development and so forth. These are things that this organization is doing. The outputs is what exactly comes out of those activities. So if you think about professional development as an activity, then an output would be the number of professional developments or what those professional developments are. So we are currently sitting in an output of one of NQAPIA's activities, for instance. NQAPIA is providing trainings for their partner organizations, and this would be one of those outputs. And moving left to right from outputs is the outcomes. And oftentimes you'll see folks kind of organize those outcomes into sort of like short, intermediate, and long term. Some other folks have organized it into proximal and distal. So proximal kind of being like something a little bit more within our control, and distal being something that is, you know, there are more variables at play, but these are the things that we're hoping we can, you know, impact, right? So for this organization specifically, they're looking at short term for improved academic performance in students, intermediate term leadership skills among their school leaders and teachers, and then long term systemic change related to like inequity gaps. So what I love about the logic model, like the logic model is definitely my preferred tool when I'm thinking about an organization, because it just so clearly outlines what the organization does, how they do it, and what are they aiming for as goals. And it's great because when you think about reporting and evaluation, and when a funder is asking you questions about, you know, the story of your organization and sometimes the impact of your organization and all this stuff, a lot of their questions really kind of boil down to some of the ones I listed here in this pink box below, which is, you know, if they're conducting a process evaluation, they're really trying to understand how you do what you do. And so you might hear questions like, what are some of the challenges that y'all face when you implemented these activities? What were some facilitators for success? What was the context in which you were doing the things you were doing? A lot of funders are also interested in more outcomes based, right? And so when they are interested in outcomes, it's really easy to just go straight to your outcome section that you've done already in your logic model and be able to say, okay, if we're if the funder is asking me for the outcomes of my organization, I can just like clearly go to the first bullet and think about like, okay, in what ways has personal growth and academic growth changed among the students that I'm working with? Um, and I love this other question that I think some funders will ask is also what were some unexpected outcomes in your work? And so what were some things that you observed in your program that weren't necessarily listed in your original, say logic model or theory of change? Because that also contributes a lot of learning to the work, right? And then the last one is an impact evaluation. Funders love throwing this term around of like, what is the impact of your organization? What is, communicate your impact? And essentially, what impact really means in that context is in what ways did the things that you do, the activities you did, in what ways did they lead to the outcomes? And so funders are trying to kind of like ascertain this cause and effect piece to it. Um, I think more often than not, it's not because we're dealing with the real world and real life and real people. Um, the cause and effect is not something that can easily be sort of like teased out. But when funders are asking that question, it's just so you know that's kind of like what they're looking for. So the final piece I wanted to kind of mention in this conversation is that um, evaluation, what I mentioned earlier, that evaluation kind of carries this sort of negative connotation is it is because evaluation historically has been used as a way to sort of like police the work that organizations are doing. There's an inherent power dynamic between funders and grantee organizations, right? And so there's this inherent kind of like idea behind evaluation that you are proving your worth to a funder, that you are worth the money that they are supporting you with. And that is something that I think in the funder space, we are trying to organize funders away from that mindset. We are trying to essentially get funders to understand that the people doing the work are the experts and they get to define what success means for them. And they also get to define like when there is success. And so these are some of the ways in which I've seen that grantee organizations can really kind of reclaim power in the sort of space of evaluation in relationship with funders. So first and foremost, it is claiming the expertise in the work. You are the expert, not the funder. The funder is not the expert in any part of this work. You are. And so like just living that and claiming that really kind of sort of challenges that inherent power dynamic and ethos of this work. The second is building relationships with your POs and your point of contacts with the funders. So much of this work is relationship based, and uh, a lot of these sort of grant requirements and evaluation requirements, they're more often than not much more flexible than they appear on paper. And so building that relationship and that rapport with a PO where they really understand your work and they understand your expertise and so forth really kind of builds a foundation for success in that relationship. Um, the second is reframing what evaluation and reporting is. it is not proving your worth. It is not about compliance. It is about learning. So, what are the things that you are trying to understand more about your work that will enhance learning and enhance program improvement and program change, right? And delivering your services better, right, to the community that you're serving. Um, this other piece is something we've been seeing a bit more is funders are more flexible, I think, than they appear in what kind of reporting and evaluation, what it looks like. So I think that some funders, instead of writing a brand new report for them, for instance, sharing a report that has been written for other funders and using it to kind of like attend to multiple funding streams is one piece. Um, a lot of funders kind of default to quantitative metrics, right? They're like, how many people did you engage? How many people did you serve? Um, and really working with your funder and your PO to understand that that really doesn't tell the full story of your organization, and that you can use other methods of answering the evaluation question that you're trying to answer. Last thing, or sorry, second and last thing is there are a lot of non-financial resources and support that that is out there, and funders are able to kind of serve as a connection point in the ecosystem to provide that support and resources. So requesting those from your funder is something that I also like really encourage folks to do as well. And then the last piece here is building knowledge and capacity for evaluation, and specifically equitable evaluation. What is equitable evaluation compared to traditional evaluation? What does that look like? Building that sort of knowledge and capacity really gives, I think, grantee organizations a leg up in the ability to sort of advocate for their expertise, right? And advocate for what they do in this space. So, yeah, that is it there. Did pretty well on time, which is great because I would love to move into Q&A with everyone. And
Beautiful. Let's get some affirmations to win for this wonderful presentation and just kind of dropping some really wonderful and useful knowledge. So with that though, I'm happy to transition to some open Q&A. There's a few things in the chat already, so I'm actually going to start with the second question we received, which is, would we be able to go back to the previous slide after the logic model example? So when, if you're open to it, maybe you could just really quickly provide some like highlights of maybe the logic model and the theories of change for folks. And as a reminder, we will also have these slides available for you to view after the training as well. So you can definitely take this in and come back to it later.
yeah, absolutely. So which slide was it?
I believe this attendee was asking about the slide right before this one that you currently have up.
Is it this one here?
Yep, we got
Oh,
it, this
great.
one. And I believe the distinction that Wynn had made between the theory of change and the logic model is theory of change is more of a narrative breakdown, whereas a logic model is more of a visual breakdown.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think in a lot of ways um they're almost interchangeable in most ways. Like I think they're just kind of like technical terms. Um when people say logic model, they are very much like they very much mean this diagram here, and with these headings. And I think someone in the comments, actually, I'm reading from Selena, this question of for organizations with multiple programs working in parallel with each other and not always, but sometimes intersecting, can they still share one theory of change? It's such a great question. And so my first answer is related to the logic model, just because it's a visual way of it. Um, what a lot of folks will do is there will be an extra column here in between inputs and activities where they will say, where it will be labeled as strategies. And so in that strategy might be three parallel adjacent strategies of work. And then each of those strategies having its own set of activities, right? So that would be how it's like depicted in a logic model. And then in a theory of change, kind of really similarly, just in a narrative format instead. So like, what are the three buckets of work that your organization does?
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Win. I'm just going to add some comments in the chat just to follow that up. Um, but yeah, now open questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you want to do a quick little intro, go off mute. Also invite you all to throw some questions out that way. Well done, Win. It sounds like you answered every single possible question that could have come up in the presentation. Looks like we have one more. Totally fine to ask questions that may or may not feel a little off topic, and we'll just speak to if we're able to address them. So one question we receive is, what are some examples of non-monetary support that orgs can ask funders for? This person's org has received support through the use of, it sounds like, venue spaces, conference rooms, some financial coaching, but we're looking to have some specific asks to be empowered with, and just go up to our funders with some direct asks.
Yeah. So the first ones that come to mind for me is if we go back to the slide here. Okay. So I want to really kind of highlight this reporting and usage of the findings of an evaluation. One of the most harmful things that traditional evaluation kind of processes, one of the most harmful things that happens is where the funder will ask grantee organizations to do an evaluation report, and then the eval report will go to the funder and be sent into the ether, and you'll never see it again, and it doesn't get used, and it was literally just there as an exercise for the funder. It doesn't encourage learning. It doesn't do really any utility, right? And one of the things that we've been pushing more for is how do we really kind of like think about evaluation in a way that it's useful for the organizations. And so when we look at this reporting and use space, something I've seen funders really make available is things like design for reports or one pagers, or things on websites, or visuals, graphic visuals, um, funders offering that non-monetary support, or perhaps a person who can help put those things together. That's one thing. I've seen funders work on acknowledge that narrative shift in this work is really important. And so a lot of funders have provided trainings on things like narrative and narrative shift, trainings on storytelling. Um, that is something that I have seen be very useful and be very kind of like requested. Um, Moving into these other spaces, um, I think that funders are more and more acknowledging that, data collection can look differently for organizations. And so it doesn't have to be this idea of like key performance indicators, that they can really work with you and have a conversation with you about like, what is the question that interests you? And what are some cool ways to go about answering that question? And so that's some more sort of like direct PO support that the program officer, fund director, or so forth can really support with. Oh, I'll also say, I think this was probably mentioned, and I think it was mentioned in one of the other, either the fundraising or grant writing ones. Um, there's also this piece that funders need to recognize their role in the whole ecosystem of this work, that they're also really able to connect you with other funders. And so that is definitely their network, and their sort of space in the ecosystem is something that you can also really leverage as non-financial support.
Wonderful. And another question, based on the last slide that had equitable evaluation list, if you want to bring that slide up. Can you clarify who being who the equitable evaluation is for? Thinking about from the lens of our participants or organizers, or the funding side of things, I believe. So what does it look like for it to be equitable evaluation for organizations?
I love this so much. Great question. I think the short answer is both the community that the organizations are serving, as well as the organizations themselves. And so I'm actually going to scroll a little back to this slide here. I didn't go through these individually, but if you do have an opportunity to read these, this is something that I think more and more funders are engaging with. The idea that uh, this work needs to prioritize things that are not centered around funders' goals, that it's centered around the community's goals, what will benefit community, what will be useful for community, as well as, of course, the organizations serving those communities. And so when folks refer to equitable evaluation, what that means is evaluation that centers the community and serves the community, not serving the funder in the sense of like proving your worth to funders, or in a lot of ways for funders to take credit for your work too, right? They're like, we, we made grants, $2 million grants to, for racial equity, and they like, claim credit for that when actually like they didn't do anything, right? Um, so equitable evaluation is essentially really kind of like recentering who and what this work is for.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that question and very thoughtful response. We'll give it maybe another couple minutes for any sort of last minute questions. And then we'll just wrap up, stop our recording. So I'll just pause, give it a few more seconds to breathe if there's any lingering questions that come to people's minds.
I'd like to throw in while we wait as well. Don't mind me. I believe it's Sade. Correct my pronunciation. If not, as for the bank, would these funders ask for everything, and let them say no? But I think in that question, we want to be empowered, or the statement, we want to be empowered to know what to ask for. I think that theory of change or logic model is a good tool to use within your own group to identify gaps, because sometimes, especially when I was working in grassroots, we were so like in the works, doing mutual aid, doing direct service. We didn't have time to zoom out and be like, there's a huge gap in how we're doing this thing. And so taking a little bit of time to use one of the tools and like lay it out and be like, oh wow, we're not actually offering the service. We're not bailing people out in the way that feels good. We're not offering food, emergency housing in the way that feels good, procedurally. These tools really help you internally, like zoom in on those things. And once you know that that's a gap, that's something to take to potential funders to be like, I know y'all have a drive somewhere full of templates, project planning. I know y'all have report templates. If y'all want us to fill out this big old report, can you provide us with a template to help move us along the way? Y'all have what is it? Zoom, what is it? The webinar style Zoom that costs too much money? Great. Do you want to add us on as a user so we can do a webinar? So funders, like it's but larger organizations in general tend to have more like technical access and access to more like written or digital like tools that grassroots orgs don't always have those connections to. So any need that comes up, feel free to write it out. Don't send like 30 emails now, but feel free to like, take that time, make that list and share it with the funder. Even if they're not able to fulfill those needs, they might know a way that another organization could hop in and provide that need in a free way. So I wanted to definitely put that out there. Do not be afraid to ask these funders for the whole bag.
Ask in the worst case scenarios, they tell you no. Yes, wish list it. I love it. Write out those wish lists for those funders. All right, y'all. Well, with that, I'm going to have Reggie stop our cloud recording, and then I'm going to stop our local recording to wrap everything up.